The war had ended years ago, but the echoes still haunted the galaxy. Ruined cities floated in orbit. Burned planets turned silent. And deep inside one of those forgotten worlds stood a cold metal building, an orphanage for the young left behind by the war. They were called the Cubs of Karnak, children of the predator species, that once fought against the human fleets, small-clawed and scarred. They hissed at anyone who came close. They had never known what a mother's touch felt like. They had never heard someone say their name with kindness. They were raised by machines, fed by drones, and watched by guards who feared them. For the galaxy, they were dangerous leftovers of the war. For the human race, they were a reminder of what it meant to fight monsters. But for one human, Lieutenant Mara Ellis, they were something else. She called them children. When Mara first arrived, the orphanage's gates hissed open with the sound of rust and age. She stood there, a lone figure in a simple uniform, a box of supplies in her hands. Her boots sank into the gray dust. The alien caretaker, a tall insectoid being, buzzed in disbelief. "You are the volunteer from Earth?" it asked. Mara nodded. "Yes, I'm here to help." The caretaker's voice clicked. "Help? You cannot help these. They bite, they scream, they break. Machines are safer." Mara smiled softly. "Maybe, but I'm not a machine." She stepped inside. The doors shut behind her with a heavy sound, like the gates of a forgotten prison closing. The first room was dim. Metal walls, flickering lights, and rows of small beds made of steel. The cubs were there. Dozens of them, small predator creatures with fur like shadows and eyes that glowed faintly red in the half-light. They watched her without moving. Some crouched on the floor, some hid behind their beds. None of them spoke. Mara placed the box on a table and opened it. Inside were blankets, clean water, and small toys, simple things from Earth. She smiled. "Hello," she said softly, her voice gentle. No answer. A cub hissed. Another growled. Their translator devices flickered, struggling to read their broken language. Mara didn't move closer. She just sat down on the floor, crossing her legs. The cubs blinked. No one had ever sat on the floor before. No adult ever came down to their level. She reached into the box, pulled out a small stuffed bear and placed it in front of her. "This is Teddy," she said. "He's small, but he's brave." One cub tilted its head, confused. Another one bared tiny fangs. They didn't understand the words, but they understood the tone. It wasn't command. It wasn't fear. It was soft. Hours passed. Mara stayed there, talking quietly. She told stories, not about war or soldiers, but about stars, oceans, and Earth's blue sky. The cubs listened from the shadows, pretending not to. When she stood to leave, one cub threw a metal bowl at her. It hit her shoulder. She turned slowly, looked at the cub, and smiled. "You missed," she said kindly. The cub froze. No shouting. No punishment. No fear in her eyes, only calm. When she walked out, she could feel their eyes following her. Not with hatred, but confusion. That night, the alien caretaker recorded his report. "The human does not understand. These cubs were born from battlefields. They were trained by pain. She cannot change that." He sent the report to the Galactic Council, but Mara didn't hear those words. She was too busy preparing for the next day. Morning came early. Mara carried a tray of warm food herself, not using drones. She entered the room again. This time the cubs didn't hiss. They only watched. "I brought breakfast," she said, setting the tray down. No one moved. She waited. 5 minutes, 10. Then slowly one cub crawled forward. Its fur was dark gray, its eyes gold. It sniffed the food, then looked up at her. Mara knelt beside it. "Go ahead. It's yours." The cub picked up the bread with sharp claws and took a small bite. Its ears twitched in surprise. It tasted good. Others started creeping closer, their curiosity stronger than their fear. Mara smiled quietly, not saying a word. For the first time in years, the room filled with the small sound of chewing, not growling. Days turned into weeks. The cubs began following her around, always pretending it was an accident. If she cleaned, they watched. If she hummed, they listened. If she laughed, they blinked, startled, as if laughter was something sacred. Once, when a cub fought another, she stepped in. Not with a weapon, not with orders. She placed a hand between them and said gently, "No hurting. We share." The cubs froze. No one had ever told them not to hurt before. Mara spent her nights writing reports on an old tablet. Her notes were simple, They are angry, yes. But they're not evil. They just don't know what gentle means. One evening when the suns were setting, Mara brought something new, a small speaker. She played earth music. Soft notes of piano filled the metal room. The cubs hissed at first, confused by the strange sound. Then the smallest one, barely the size of her arm, crept forward and sat beside her. It tilted its head, eyes half closed, listening. Mara whispered, "It's called music. It helps hearts heal." The cub's ears flicked. It leaned against her knee, light as a feather, cautious but curious. She froze, not wanting to scare it away. When it looked up at her, she smiled softly and said, "You're safe." The cub blinked, then made a quiet sound, a mix between a growl and a sigh. It was the first sound of peace that Room had ever heard. By the 10th day, the orphanage guards had stopped laughing at her. By the 15th, they stopped calling her crazy. Something was happening. The cubs, once violent, were calmer. They no longer attacked the drones. They slept without nightmares. Mara had done what no machine or alien could do. She had given them something new, a choice. But not everyone was happy about it. In a high office across the base, the alien warden read Mara's progress report. He frowned. "She names them?" "Yes, sir," replied the assistant. "She said numbers are not for children." The warden's eyes narrowed. "Names give identity. Identity gives will. And will leads to rebellion." He opened a communication line to the council. "The human experiment may be destabilizing the subjects. If it continues, they might stop obeying entirely." The council's reply came cold and immediate. "Monitor her. If she becomes a threat to control, remove her quietly." That night, Mara was still in the orphanage. She sat beside the same cub who once threw a bowl at her. It was watching her draw shapes on a data pad. Stars, moons, planets. She looked at it and said softly, "You remind me of someone." The cub tilted its head. "Who?" Her translator beeped. Their language was still broken, but the word came through clear enough. Mara smiled. "Someone brave." The cub frowned, confused by the gentle tone. It had never been called brave before, and only beast. It looked down at its claws. "Name?" it whispered. Mara blinked. "You want a name?" The cub nodded slowly. Mara thought for a long moment. Then she smiled. "Rurek, it means strong heart." The cub whispered the word back, awkward, low. "Ek." Mara laughed softly. "Yes, that's you." The other cubs turned their heads, watching. They didn't understand the word, but they understood the feeling. Later that night, as she prepared to leave, she heard a soft sound behind her. One of the smallest cubs, the one who liked the music, was standing at the door. Its voice trembled. "What, you care?" it asked, the words broken through the translator. Mara looked back, her eyes warm. "Because someone has to," she said. And she walked away. Behind her, the cubs sat in silence. For the first time, they didn't growl at the dark. They whispered her name instead. In his office, the alien warden played back the recording from the cameras. He watched the humans sit on the floor with the cubs, bleeding, smiling, refusing to give up. He turned off the screen and muttered, "Humans." They never stop, but even he didn't see what was coming next, because on that night the first cub, Urak, whispered her name again before sleeping. And in the dark corners of the galaxy, where wars were still waiting to be born, something new had begun to grow. Not fear, not power, but something the galaxy had forgotten existed: kindness. The days turned softer after that night. The air in the orphanage no longer carried only the smell of metal and fear. It carried something new, something warm. The cubs still hissed sometimes, still growled when they dreamed, but they no longer hid when Mara Ellis walked in. She no longer felt like a visitor. She felt like a promise. Each morning she came with clean water and food that actually smelled good. Sometimes she told them stories from Earth, oceans, trees, rain, things they had never seen. The cubs listened in silence, their glowing eyes watching every move she made, as if trying to understand what kind of creature she was. One morning, the oldest cub, and the gray one she called Rurak, and sat a little closer than usual. His claws rested on the floor, his fur uncombed, his eyes sharp. He didn't hiss this time. He just stared, Mara noticed. "Good morning, Rak," she said gently. He tilted his head. The word Rak sounded strange in her soft voice. That was the first name any of them had ever been given. Not a number, not a command, a name. She smiled. Do you know what it means? He shook his head. It means strong heart. Rek blinked slowly, as if testing the sound inside his chest. Strong, he repeated in a low growl. Mara nodded. Yes, that's you. The other cubs listened from the corners of the room, pretending not to care. But she saw their ears flick, their tails twitch. They were curious. They wanted names too, though none dared to ask. That night, Mara sat in her quarters, her tablet glowing with reports. She wrote, "Something changes when you name them. It's like a light appears in their eyes, like they finally believe they exist for something more than fear." The alien caretaker entered quietly. "Lieutenant Ellis," it buzzed. "You must stop this naming. It creates attachment." Mara smiled sadly. "That's the point." The alien shook its head, its antennae trembling. "They are not like you. They will never be like you." Mara looked back at her notes. Maybe they don't have to be. Maybe it's enough that they feel seen. The caretaker sighed and left, muttering something about human stubbornness. The next day, Mara entered the playroom carrying a small crate. The cubs were pretending to sleep, but she could see their tails twitching. "I brought something new," she said. No one moved. She opened the crate and pulled out a set of colored chalks and flat pieces of dark board. "Today," she smiled, "we draw." The cubs stared. None of them had ever been allowed to create before. She drew a small circle. "This is Earth," she said. "It's where I come from. Lots of water, lots of green." A cub hissed softly. "We come from fire," it muttered. Mara looked up. "Then draw your fire." The cub froze. "Drawn fire?" "Yes," she said. "Draw what you are. Draw what you feel." Slowly, claws reached out. Chalk scratched against board. Lines appeared, messy, wild, alive. The cubs drew fire, teeth, stars, storms, and in the middle of all that, one drew a small shape beside a taller one. It looked like a human and a cub standing together. Mara leaned down. "Who's that?" The cub's translator clicked. "You." Mara's chest tightened. She smiled softly, blinking fast. "That's beautiful," she whispered. Later that day, she gathered them in a circle. "Do you want names?" she asked. The cubs looked at each other, unsure if it was a trick. Names meant ownership in their old world. They were called by codes, by ranks, by numbers burned on their collars. But Mara's voice was different. Her names were gifts, not cages, one by one. "They came forward, you," she said to a small golden-furred cub. "You'll be Tali. It means hope." "You," to a shy one with dark scales. "You'll be Keth, light that never dies." Each name she spoke seemed to fill the room with warmth. The cubs repeated them quietly, as if afraid the sound would vanish if they spoke too loud. And then it happened. The smallest one, the one who always hid behind Rarak, stepped forward with trembling paws. Its eyes were wet. "Name?" it whispered. Mara knelt down, meeting its gaze. "Your soul," she said gently. "It means sun," the cub blinked. "Sun?" "Yes," Mara smiled. "Because you shine even when you don't know it." The cub sniffed, then touched her hand with a claw, a small, careful touch, and then for the first time in their short, brutal lives, the cubs began to cry. Not from pain, not from fear, but from something new, something soft. They wept because someone had finally seen them. The recording drones captured everything. That evening, the footage reached the Galactic Council. In a dark chamber, alien silhouettes watched in silence as the images played. The humans sitting on the floor, surrounded by predator cubs, naming them one by one. The cubs' eyes glowed, and not with rage, but with peace. "This is impossible," one counselor hissed. "Emotional suppression fails," said another. "Human presence alters neural patterns." "She is changing them," said the eldest counselor. "That cannot be allowed. Should we remove her?" A voice asked. The eldest thought for a long moment. "No, observe her longer. If she breaks them completely, we'll have proof that humans are too dangerous to coexist." Back in the orphanage, life continued. But something invisible had changed. The cubs now played small games, growling and chasing each other in harmless fun. When Mara arrived, they greeted her with low, rumbling sounds. Not threats, but something close to joy. One day, when she walked in late, Rock stood up and asked, "Why late?" Mara laughed softly. "You missed me?" The cub grunted. "Room cold. You warm." It wasn't poetry, but to her it was the most beautiful sentence she'd ever heard. She knelt down and said, "You're learning fast." Rurak tilted his head. You teach we. Listen. Then he paused, eyes narrowing. Others outside. They watch, Mara froze. Who? Rurak pointed his claw toward the cameras in the ceiling. They always watch, he growled. Mara smiled faintly, trying to hide her unease. Let them. We have nothing to hide. But deep down she knew Rurak was right. That night, when she returned to her quarters, a message was waiting for her on the console. Lieutenant Ellis, report to Command Center Gamma tomorrow. Bring no personal belongings, she frowned. That wasn't normal. The next morning she handed out small star-shaped pendants to each cub, tiny tokens she'd made from scrap metal. These are yours, she said. To remind you that you matter. Tali held hers close. Matter? Yes, Mara said. It means you're important. The cubs didn't understand fully, but they nodded. They liked the way the word sounded. Before leaving for her meeting, she turned to them. I'll be back soon, Rurak frowned. Promise? Mara hesitated only for a second. Then she smiled. Promise. When she entered the command center, the air felt colder. 3 officers waited, 2 alien, 1 human. The alien warden spoke first. Lieutenant Ellis, you've been observed performing unauthorized emotional conditioning. Mara blinked. Conditioning? I'm teaching them to live, to disobey. The warden snapped. You're creating attachments. They're predators, not pets. The human officer spoke calmly. Mara, you're crossing lines. The council fears you're, she interrupted, her voice trembling with anger. Fears what? That kindness works? Silence, the warden's mandibles clicked. You will cease personal interaction immediately. The cubs will return to standard machine care. Mara stared at them, her jaw tight. You'll undo everything. Emotions make them unstable, said the warden. They were never meant to feel. Mara's eyes burned. Then maybe that's why your wars never end. No one answered. The order was clear. That night, she didn't sleep. She sat in the dark, staring at her tablet, at the faces of the cubs she had named. She thought of their laughter, their confusion, their tears. She thought of how Rurak had said, room cold. You warm. And she made a decision she wouldn't stop. The next morning, the cubs waited by the door. When she arrived, they ran toward her. Ran with joy and noise and life. She hugged them all, even the ones pretending to be shy. She looked around the room and whispered, If they take me away, you keep saying your names, every day. Loud, so the world never forgets you exist. Rurak frowned. Take you? Mara smiled, hiding the truth behind her eyes. No one can take what's already in your hearts. Later that night, the warden's final report reached the council. The human has refused compliance. Emotional infection spreading fast. Cubs exhibit loyalty to her above all others. Recommend immediate containment or removal. The council's reply was short and cold. Approved. Initiate removal at dawn. But as the lights dimmed in the orphanage, the cubs were already awake. They had heard whispers from the guards. They knew Rurak stood by the window staring at the stars. We not forget, he growled softly. We keep names. The others nodded. And in that dark metal room they began whispering the only words that had ever made them feel alive. Their names. Over and over, like a prayer. Like a promise. The dawn came slowly, painted in pale light through the cracked glass of the orphanage windows. But something in the air was wrong. The hum of drones outside was too loud, too sharp. Even the cubs felt it. Rurak lifted his head from the blanket Mara had given him. His ears twitched. Noise, he growled. Tali blinked awake beside him. Bad noise, the doors hissed open. Metal footsteps echoed down the hall. And then, silence. Mara Ellis was already awake. She stood in her small quarters, staring at the uniform folded neatly on her bed. The same one she had worn the day she arrived. It looked heavier now, like it carried too many memories. A message blinked red on her console. Lieutenant Ellis, report immediately. You are to be relocated for reassignment. Do not resist, she read it twice. Then with slow fingers she turned off the console. Her eyes drifted toward the small drawing pinned to the wall. A child's crude picture of her and the cubs all smiling. It was drawn by Keth, the one who still struggled to speak but loved to laugh. Mara's throat tightened. They'll take me, she whispered, and they'll make them forget. She couldn't let that happen. Outside, the alien warden and a group of armed guards approached the orphanage. Their faces were cold, unreadable. "This is not a punishment," the warden said. "It's containment. Humans are dangerous because they care too much." The soldiers nodded. They did not understand the irony of their own words. Inside the playroom, the cubs gathered together, whispering. Rex sniffed the air. "They come," he growled. "Take her." Soul trembled. "We hide her." "No," Rex said firmly. "We fight." They had no weapons, only claws, small bodies, and courage borrowed from a human. The youngest cub whimpered. "She say no hurting." Rack looked at him. "Then we protect." Mara entered the room just as the lights flickered. The cubs turned to her at once, crowding around her legs. Their fur bristled, their eyes glowing faintly in the half-light. "Mara," Rurak said, voice low. "They come." She knelt down, brushing his fur with gentle hands. "I know. You run," Tali said quickly. "We make noise." "You go," Mara smiled sadly. "No, Tali, I'm not running." She looked around the room, at the faces she had learned by heart. Each one different, each one scarred, but each one now shining with something the galaxy had forgotten. Love. She whispered, "Whatever happens today, you don't forget who you are. Say your names, every day, loud. Promise me." They nodded, whispering together. "Promise." The doors burst open. Guards poured in, weapons raised, their armor shining under harsh light. "Mara Ellis," the warden called. "Step away from the subjects." She stood slowly. "They have names." The warden's eyes narrowed. "That's enough," he gestured to his soldiers. "Take her." But when the soldiers stepped forward, Rack moved first. He jumped in front of Mara, growling deep, teeth bared. The other cubs followed, forming a circle around her. "Move!" One guard shouted. Rack didn't move. Neither did the others. Their small bodies trembled, but they stood firm. Mara's voice shook. "Please, they're just children. They're predators," the warden hissed. "You've infected them with human weakness." Mara met his gaze. "If kindness is weakness, then the galaxy deserves to fall." The warden raised his hand. "Restrain her." The guard stepped closer, but before they could reach, Rack roared. The sound wasn't loud, and it was deep. It shook the air, vibrating through the walls. The cubs joined him, their voices rising like thunder. And then something strange happened. The lights began to flicker. The air shimmered, the same strange energy that the lab once detected. The bond between Mara and the cubs began to awaken. Blue light spread from her hands as she reached toward them. The cubs glowed faintly, golden like fire underwater. The guards froze. Their scanners went wild. "Energy spike. Unknown source." One shouted. The warden stumbled back. "What are you doing?" Mara's voice was soft, calm. "I'm showing them what love looks like." The energy pulsed once, bright, beautiful, alive. The guards' weapons short-circuited. The walls trembled. The orphanage AI began to record automatically, broadcasting the event to every screen in the district. The galaxy was watching. Mara knelt again, surrounded by light. "Urak," she said. "Say it." He looked at her, confused. "Say what?" "Your name." He blinked, then straightened, eyes burning gold. "Urak," he shouted. "Say them all," she called. The cubs raised their voices, one by one, louder and louder. Tali, Keth, Soul. Their names echoed like music, like thunder wrapped in warmth, and the energy grew brighter, filling the entire building. The guards dropped their weapons, shielding their faces. Even the warden fell to his knees, whispering, "Impossible!" When the light finally faded, no one moved for a long time. Smoke rose from broken machines. The walls were cracked but standing. And in the center of the room stood Mara, alive. The cubs pressed close around her, unharmed. The warden stared at her in silence. "You risked your life. For them." Mara took a slow breath. "They would have done the same for me." The warden shook his head. "You changed them. You've changed everything," she smiled faintly. "Good." An hour later, the transmission of the event reached the Galactic Council. Billions watched across the systems. Soldiers, teachers, parents, and children. They saw predator cubs crying as they shouted their names beside a human. They saw light, not war, and they felt something they didn't expect. Hope. The council met in emergency session. Some demanded her arrest. Some demanded protection for her and the cubs. But one old alien, scarred from wars long forgotten, whispered, If one human can stop fear with kindness, imagine what many could do. No one spoke after that. A few weeks later, the orphanage changed. The guards were gone. The machines were reprogrammed. The cubs were no longer called subjects. They were called children. Mara became the first official human guardian in the Galactic Rehabilitation Program. Her name spread through colonies and fleets and whispered by those who had lost hope. They called her the mother of the Karnak cubs. One evening, months after that day, Mara sat outside under a sky filled with two suns. The cubs played around her, chasing lights, laughing in their rough, broken voices. She smiled, holding her tablet, recording one last entry. They used to hiss when I came near. They used to believe kindness was a trap. Now they laugh, they sing, they draw pictures. I gave them names, but they gave me something greater. Proof that even in a galaxy of monsters, humanity can still heal. She looked up. Harak was sitting nearby, watching the horizon. You thinking again? She asked with a grin. Rak tilted his head. Thinking about you leaving someday. Mara sighed softly. Someday, yes. But not yet. He looked down. We remember names, always. She reached out and ruffled his fur. Good. That's all I wanted. As night fell, the stars came out, and millions of them shining across endless space. The cubs gathered around her, curling up in the soft grass, their eyes half closed. Mara whispered softly, You were born in war, but you'll grow in peace, Rirek mumbled, already sleepy. Peace sounds strange, she smiled. Then we'll make it sound normal. Somewhere far away on the Council's main world, the warden wrote his final report. Human kindness is not weakness. It spreads like light in dark water. Once given, it cannot be stopped. He closed the file and stared out at the stars. For the first time in his life, he smiled. Back on the orphanage world, the cubs slept soundly, their breathing calm, their dreams quiet. Mara looked around the room one last time before turning off the lights. The walls that once echoed with growls now whispered laughter. And in that silence, she said softly, Good night, my brave ones. A small voice answered sleepily. Good night, Mara. The camera of the story pulls back from the room, the building, the planet, until all that's left is a small blue light shining in a galaxy of darkness. A light born not from power or fear, but from a human heart that refused to give up. Final voiceover. Ending line for YouTube narration. The galaxy thought kindness was weakness, but when the cubs learned their names, they learned what it meant to be alive, and the stars themselves whispered humans. They never stopped trying.